Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to the January 2020 next year development discourse. My name is Patrick Okibo. I'm a principal partner at Next Year. The development discourse is an initiative of Next Year to deepen discourse on topical public policy issues in Nigeria. Next Year is a multi-competency public policy advisory firm with a focus on Africa. There are a number of industries we're focused on: power, security and conflict, governance, advisory, across economic development issues. The topic for today's discourse is state police. If yes, how? So that assumes that it can also be no. So we're looking forward to a very lively discourse. By the end of today, we should have answers to the following questions. One, why is Nigeria's police force unable to provide security to Nigerians? Two, is state police the answer to that problem? If yes, how should it work? If no, what are the options for improving security in Nigeria? To join me for this discourse are two eminently qualified professionals. Austin Iwa is a seasoned police officer, retired now. He retired as an Assistant Inspector General of Police. Prior to his retirement, he was Commissioner for Police in Gombe, Kaduna, and Bayelsa. He was also a former Commissioner for Crime Prevention and Community Policing at Force Headquarters. He is recognized the voice, the leader, thought leader when it comes to community policing in Nigeria. He's currently a senior policing consultant with the British High Commission's National Policing Program. A round of applause for him, please. Dr. Vladimir Krek has been in Nigeria since August 2018. He is the head of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Nigeria. He holds a PhD in social science. He was an associate professor of European studies at Kobe University in Japan, an advisor in different capacities for the state of Brandenburg, Germany. Please, a round of applause for him. Okay, and on that note, I'd like to invite AIG Austin to make his opening remarks. 10 minutes max. We have it open for you.
Thank you very much. You are welcome for this very important event. As stated, my name is AIG Iwa, retired. Retired in 2018 as Assistant Inspector General of Police. Let me start by saying that in 1999, we adopted democratic principles and practice of governance. But whether Nigeria adapted to those principles is another issue for debate. We adopted it. We don't know whether we adapted the principles. And I'm sure every one of us knows what these principles are. But police is the very soul of any democratic system of governance. And the police are important in any democracy because they provide for the rule of law, which enhances civil trust and helps maintain social order. Equality under the law is a basic principle of a democratic society. Every democratic society requires high levels of civic trust because democratic governments receive legitimacy only from the consent of the governed. Police are the keepers of democratic principles and practice. And as the eminent Professor Gary Marks said, it is ironic that police are both a major support and a major threat to democratic society. On the one hand, the police exemplify one of the tenets of democracy, the rule of law, and on the other hand, the police are given exclusive power to use force, which can be abused to undermine democracy. The police therefore play a critical role in the process, in the success or failure of any democratic society. Now, over the years, the country has witnessed increasing debates over the quality of police services provided by former policing structures, such as the Nigerian police. At the core of these debates has been the failure of formal policing structures to provide the necessary safety and security desired by all Nigerians. The problem becomes more complicated when the very policing organization become instruments of rights abuse with allegations of extrajudicial killings on the one hand, and also instrument of state control of citizens or outright use by politicians. To underscore these debates is the call for Nigerians, especially the political class, for state-controlled police forces. To many politicians, this seems to be the only solution to the incapacity of the national police to provide safety and security. The argument is that if every state is allowed to have its own police force, then safety and security will be improved. Certainly, the need for state-controlled police force is desirable. But given the politics surrounding the debate, it seems this agitation is more a political expediency than actual attempt to provide citizens with public safety and security. Some of these states have established quasi-police agencies in their states. It is debatable whether these agencies have any kind of security, have provided any kind of security to the states. So it is important that as we debate the necessity or not of state-controlled, I use the word state-controlled police force, it will be necessary to analyze it within the context of the political economy of its desirability. Now, having said that, I want to look at this, having made those opening remarks. Is the federal or national police system working? For me, if no, why? If yes, how? I have a chart here. I'm going to look at it within the context of internal and external, and broken down into capacity and integrity. Now, but I'll look at it from external first. I'll start from the external because the external is the ground norm of the development of any governance system in Nigeria. And we go back to 1826 when the police was created. It was created as a colonial regime that was involved in the brutal repression or suppression of indigenous people. In post-colonial regime in Nigeria, the same policing system persisted. During the military, the police was militarized and focused on reactive policing. Police are therefore seen as a threat. Police was seen as a threat to the military, and therefore there was need to underfund and degrade its capacity to provide for safety and security. So government has not been able to, in our current situation, like I was discussing with you the other day, by 1999, when we transited to democracy, was there a true transition in the sense of all the policing, all the governance structures, the elements, the agencies of government, did they transit, or the transition was just in our minds? But in terms of systems, in terms of processes, in terms of procedures, in terms of culture, in terms of the philosophy of governance of these separate institutions, was there a transition? And I proceed that it is only one agency that attempted to transit, and that was the police, by introducing community policing, which is a system of policing that recognizes the importance of community, that brings policing, makes policing a local issue. So within the context of the capacity of government to provide for a safe and secured policing environment, there are a lot of questions. Now, in the 1999 Constitution, section 214, subsection 1, says that no, amongst other things it says no other police force shall be established for the federation or any part thereof. It further goes to say that before making any appointment to the office of the IG or removing from the office, the president shall consult the Nigeria Police Council, which means that there is a council that has responsibility for organization and administration of the Nigerian police, and also general supervision of the Nigerian police, as well as advising the president on the appointment of an IG. Which means that if we want to talk about state police, we also need to see it within the context of the responsibility that has already been given to governors in terms of deciding what kind of police force we need in this country. So it's not about coming out to make noise, but you have a platform there that provides for discussion. Now that is external. Maybe in the course of discussion we'll go. But in terms of internal, how many minutes? 2 minutes. In terms of internal, because of the lack of support from the external structures of governance, what do we have internally? We have a police organization that has structural problems that has to do with independence. Nobody's talking about the independence of the police or insulating the police from political manipulation. So you have deficient normative framework, insufficient resources, and incentive, including insufficient salaries. If I tell you the salary of a police commissioner of police, you will walk away, because it's a shame. It's a shame. It's not more than 250,000 per month, if you don't know. And for me, as a retired AIG, my pension is 87,000 naira. It's a shame. And then you want somebody on 250,000 naira per month to give you a 3 million naira job. So then there's poor quality investigation within the system. There's lack of transparency. There's lack of sufficient legal assistance to ensure protection of victims. There are allegations of allegations of human rights abuse within the police that has to do with a lot of structural defects. But having said that, what has been done? What has been done? We introduced community-oriented policing and as a platform, as an instrument to reform the police. It is seen as a transition from traditional to modern ways of policing. As a transition to democratic policing practice, it is characterized by the notion of service rather than police force. This is what we keep building in over the years. I have been involved with community policing, like you said, for 1 minute now, for more than 18 years in police reform. So there are a lot of capacity that we've been able to build into the police, but it's something that will take a long time to mature and nurture and take us to where we are hoping to be. As you can see from here, the MPP is one of the programs, Nigerian policing program, that I have been involved since I retired. And we've been working in Lagos, we've been working in Maiduguri, we've been working in FCT here and Kano. And part of what we're doing is working with police division in such a way that communities are involved in the way they have a say, not just involved, but have a say in the ways in which they are being policed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, that's pretty small. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to commend the organizers for inviting me to this program to talk about state police. If yes, how? I was already introduced. My name is Vladimir Craig, head of Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Nigeria, and our organization has been operating in Nigeria since 2001, mainly in the area of democracy promotion. So we relate quite a lot to the National Assembly, to the House of Representatives, and we have partnerships in total with 9 state houses of assembly in Nigeria. We provide capacity building to parliamentarians, to the members of parliament, and of course consultancy. Apart from that, our organization in Nigeria got involved in the support of the security sector reform in Nigeria in 2006. Since then, we have been funded by the German Foreign Office in order to promote interagency collaboration in Nigeria. We operate in a number of geopolitical zones. Recently, we focused we focused our activities, especially on the northeast, the north central, and the south. And of course, during our programs, dialogue programs, and capacity buildings for security personnel, we invite, include, and interact quite a lot with the police as well. Even though to our closest partners belong, of course, not only of course, but to our closest partners belong the Committee on Army in the House of Representatives, and we relate quite a lot to the NSCDC as well. What I'm going to do in my opening remarks is to very, very briefly, give a comparison on the police structure in Germany and the policing structure, let me put it that way, in Nigeria, just to give you an insight or an idea of how, for instance, state police can work and what the difference to Nigeria is. Of course, state police is a rather typical element, a typical form of organization in many federations. I looked it up for today's program. I wasn't really aware about all the countries. Some of them, all of them federations are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Germany, of course, I mentioned already, India, Mexico, United States, and even some unitary states like Spain have granted to some extent autonomy to policing in the regions, in that case, especially in Catalonia. You might be aware of the issues in Catalonia with the separatist movement, and of course the former violent extremist in the Basque country. So for these, for instance, two regions, there has been introduced a special regional or province police with a rather far autonomy. Now, looking at Germany, the German system is organized in a rather simple way, actually. We have a federal police and we have a state police. And the federal police relates more or less only to federal issues and federal assignments. The federal police is divided in a federal police force, which is responsible mainly for border control, for immigration services, for the protection of airports and railways, the protection of foreign embassies, and it is also assigned to get involved in solutions for special crisis situations and counterterrorism, for instance, hostages situations. The federal police is actually only asked to assist the state police if it is requested by a state. Otherwise, the federal police has no right to interfere with state businesses. Next to the federal police, we have a rather smaller force that is called Federal Criminal Investigation. This force is responsible for the collaboration with international organizations like Europol and Interpol. It provides also assistance to some extent to the state criminal investigation offices. So we have a similar structure on state level as well. I'm getting to it in a minute. And it can counter cases in Germany when it is again requested by a state or if a case involves 2 or more states, meaning that criminal activities are across borders. Now, looking at the state level, and this is actually the major police force we have in Germany, we have again 2 different organizations. It's the state police force itself with and next to it the State Criminal Investigation Office. And the state police has actually in Germany two main assignments: protective, as a protective police, as a criminal police as well. Next to it, the State Criminal Investigation is only responsible for so-called serious crimes in Germany, meaning drug trafficking, organized crime, environmental and white-collar crime, extremist and terrorist offenses. White-collar crime, of course, includes corruption. I think that this system is very transparent. These organizations or security agencies, both of them adhere to their respective ministries of interior on federal level and on state level. Now, looking to Nigeria, I counted in total 7 security agencies on federal level that are responsible for core police assignments. Of course, the Nigerian police, then we have the Federal Road Safety Corps, Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, National Agency for the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons, or against human trafficking, the Independent Corruption Practices Commission, and of course the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Now, we have to state that the security architecture in Nigeria is rather fragmented in comparison to probably many other states, especially when it relates to crime in the country itself. And if you compare it to Germany, it's rather differently organized. This structure, including all the other security agencies that are listed on this slide, results from a very inconsistent lawmaking in Nigeria. They have been created over time since the independence of Nigeria, and they have been given mandates. And if someone looks into the different acts that relate to the security agencies, you will realize very quickly that these acts have overlapping mandates. They're giving the same mandates to different agencies, bringing them in rivalry and a competitive situation in a certain way. That, again, entails many problems in Nigeria, especially when it comes to operations. I'm quite sure that many of you know all those videos and incidences from the newspapers when you have two different security agencies in a standoff while there's actually a case to be solved, leading, among others, to shootings among security agencies and killing each other, meaning that security personnel kills each other. I would like to give you a very a brief example of a overlapping mandate in Nigeria. I have chosen the act of the police force and the act of the NSCDC. According to the Police Act, the police shall be employed for the prevention and detection of crime, the apprehension of offenders, the preservation of law and order, the protection of life and property, and also for military duties within and outside the country, which again relates actually to the armed forces, and that's a core assignment of the armed forces. When we look to the act of the NSCDC has been granted power to arrest with or without a warrant, detain, investigate, and institute legal proceedings, including any criminal activity. Now, from a not only academic point of view, but I think a very practical point of view, the question is, where's here the demarcation? When is the NSCDC supposed to act? When is the police force supposed to act? And if you go to the regions, if you talk with the officers, you will realize that even many of the security personnel are not aware of the demarcation themselves. So this is definitely a source or a problem that entails inefficiency in the security architecture of Nigeria. Now, asking the question, state police, if yes, how? We have to answer a number of questions, and I would like to conclude with those questions. The first of them is, of course, what type of policing should be decentralized? It is not just enough to ask for state police, but we have to talk about which assignments should go to the state level. Is it only a protective police Nigeria would like to decentralize, or would you like to give mandates and competences to a state police that are now on federal level with other agencies? The next question, of course, that relates to the first question is, what legal changes are necessary to do that? We have probably to change the constitution, first of all. Secondly, we have to change all the acts that relate to the several security agencies from which competences should be taken or are supposed to be taken and given to the state level. And of course, there is, when we talk about state operations, especially in the area of security, there's no operation without a legal basis, meaning that all the state houses of assembly must pass acts for their respective states to introduce a state police in the state. So this is quite a challenge if you consider how complicated, how difficult it is in Nigeria to pass acts, how long it takes actually to pass acts. The next question I would like to raise is how will be state police funded, or how it will be ensured that they receive enough funds without true fiscal autonomy in Nigeria? Who is going to decide in future how much money, for instance, Ogun State or Kaduna State or Kano State will receive for their police force from the federal level? Even this is a form of negotiation that needs a mode, and this mode must be in a certain way be based, rooted in a legal basis. The next question is, of course, and that was already referred to by my predecessor, how will be the state police shielded from political abuses? And I think this question has been mostly discussed in the newspapers when it comes to pros and cons of state police in Nigeria. So how are you going to prevent, how is the political sphere going to prevent in Nigeria the abuse of a state police by, for instance, a governor for selfish reasons? And last but not least, the last question is, and this relates to the very first question of Patrick, is decentralization alone enough to improve security in Nigeria? I hope that we will engage in very productive discussions today, and I'm thanking you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do is just to try and unpack some of the issues a little bit, and then we'll come to the audience, take your questions, your comments, and go back and forth and see if we can find an answer to this. So, you know, to be brutally honest, I don't have a position on this issue, just because I know it's very complicated. But I'd like to say to AIG Austin, you've been an advocate for community policing. If you can kind of differentiate for us, you know, what the difference between state policing and community policing, that could be a good basis for the conversations we have.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been an advocate of community policing for quite some time, and the core of community policing is problem solving, because it is these problems that gravitate into issues that some of them are seen as crime. Now, the context here is that policing is local. Every community has its own peculiar problems, and so it should have its own tailor-made solutions. Now, community policing has to do with partnerships. Partnership with government agencies that have responsibility for safety and security, or responsibility for peacekeeping, or responsibility for making sure that the community, the welfare of the community, the health of the community is okay. And also has to do with community engagement. That is engaging with people within the community that have a say that can impact on what goes on in the community, and also about prevention of crime and also organizational reforms. What we keep hearing in Nigeria from government officials is our own police. We are going to create community policing. Like the other day from Kano State, people were talking about, the governor was talking about introducing community policing. And community policing is not, it's not a state-driven program. It's a police-driven program. It's about proactive policing. It's asking to the police to go back to its core responsibility, which is proactivity, which is looking at the fundamental problems of a community, working with other people within the community and preferring solution. So the core of community policing is not necessarily about crime. It's about problems within the community. Because like we said, and so you're talking the difference between community and state policing.
Yeah.
So what I keep hearing about state policing, it's state-controlled police. Every state wants its own police force, but they keep saying community policing. So what I think they are saying is community police. Because by the time you hear the word community police, the thinking is that every community will have its own police organization, but that's not it.
Okay, so let me stay with you for a second. So the Nigerian police force, as currently constituted, understands everything you've just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So why haven't the MPF been able to do this policing at the local level? And why should we trust that a new creation called community police or state police will be able to do what the MPF has not been able to do?
Well, to say that the police has not been involved in community policing is it's wrong. It's wrong because the program has been on for since 2003, and like I told you with MPP, it's still the program we're on. But you need to understand that this is a huge organization of more than 400,000 people.
That's the Nigerian police
yes,
force.
the Nigerian police estimated. And over the years, there hasn't been government funding to develop the structures internally, the processes and the system that will drive community policing. It is this government that has seen the importance of community policing, as I have explained, and is in the process of funding this program. Well, before now, it was just donor-driven. And once the donor do a 3-year program, they move on, then it's difficult to sustain the officers that have been trained for the program.
Okay, so before I come to you, Craig, now one of the arguments that has been made in support of community policing, which you also alluded to, is that you then have police officers who are from the communities, who understand the language, the culture, the values and so on of the people, and that they're able to know when things are about to go bad, preemptively, stop, bring security, blah, 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 blah. Okay, why hasn't the Nigerian police force been able to do that?
Yeah, I get you. Let's understand one thing. Maybe you don't get the statistics of the staff strength of our police officers in each state. I can tell you that in each state in Nigeria, 80 to 85% of frontline police officers are from that state. 80 to 85, even 90% are from that state.
Okay.
That is the frontline police officers. And a large percentage of the senior officers are also from that state. The only ones that may not be from that state is maybe the commissioner of police and his deputy. But even in some states, you have deputy commissioners that are from that state.
Okay.
So, but community policing is not about the individual police officers working in their states. No, that's not the whole thing. It's getting the community to have a say and to influence the way they are being policed.
Okay. Let me go to you, Vladimir. What's your view on this? Because if the argument has always been, allow us, the states, to form our own state police because we know our people, we can staff it with our people, we can fund it with our budget, etc. And in so doing, we can provide better policing at the local level. Do you think, especially with the work your foundation does with the security organizations, do you think that there is a solution there. Do you think that that could be the answer to the inability of the Nigerian police force to deliver security at that granular, street level? You can use that microphone. That mic.
Okay, this one.
That works.
Okay. Yeah.
Patrick, thank you for the question. I think we have to ask ourselves what should be achieved and how quickly. If we talk about state police, until the police gets restructured, that will take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to be very aware of that. That won't happen from today to tomorrow. As I mentioned before, laws must be changed, the constitution must be changed, a mode of funding must be found to making sure that these state polices, we are talking about 36 state polices, get their money to actually operate. Is this the answer to Nigeria's security problems?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about that. Is Amotekon the answer to this to the security problems of Nigeria? I'm not so sure either about that. However, I think this question must be answered very quickly when we talk about state police. Whether state police in general works, I think the answer is already given. It works, of course, and there are many countries in the world that can provide security to their population very well with state police and very efficiently. And of course, there is a not even huge debate. It's not a debate, but you can just refer to the principle of subsidiarity. Give competences to the smallest unit that can handle the issues, and it will handle the issues most efficient. In case it can't handle the issues because the issues are too big, give it to the next hierarchy in a structure of state or state organization. Now, talking about funding, I think this is one of the most important things because you mentioned it. Are the capacities right now enough? We have to ask this question as well. Are the capacities of the police, the number of policemen on the street enough to provide security in Nigeria? We had yesterday a brief meeting before this panel discussion today, and we were discussing the recommendation of the United Nations to have one policeman, a ratio of 1 policeman to 400 citizens. Now, wherever this might be written, we tried to find out, we couldn't actually. Maybe someone of you knows and can refer to the document. It doesn't matter. If we look to the most safest countries in the world, we will realize that they have even more policemen in terms of this ratio. Mm-hmm. If we look to Nigeria, we have about 380,000 policemen in Nigeria, and this makes a ratio of about 520 to 1, so 520 citizens to 1 policeman. And if you know the reality much better than me, if we consider that many of those policemen actually are not on their regular duty, but have to provide security to VIPs, security to properties, being mobile police. So in fact, the ratio is completely different and much higher. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens if you organize your police in a state police? Will this solve the problem? No. A state police alone won't solve the problem. We have to discuss also about capacity issues and how we can employ more policemen in order to provide security.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that state policing in itself, has worked in different countries, etc. So the concept or the theory of it is all right. Now, within the context of Nigeria, and this question is for you, would it be fair to conclude that the challenges we have with the Nigeria police force could also translate to these states, call it community policing, state police, whatever it is called, that those same challenges could, be transferred to these new entities, and they too will not be able to address the problem if we haven't been able to address it at the Nigeria police force level. Would that be a fair conclusion?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. These same problems will be transferred to this and just like Craig said, before you even begin to talk about creating a state police, you have a national police. You need to look at the structures, you need to look at the systems, you look at the processes, the procedures, and the competency and skills that are internal. Whether, because the whole question, the problem I see, it's a problem of competency and behavior and attitudes that police officers display in the course of doing their job. And these are not different beings, they are Nigerians. And if you say we want to do state police today, obviously there will be an option for the same police officers to opt for either you want to go to your state and be a police officer or you want to be federal. Just like when the current SSS was being formed, it was carved out of the police, it was yanked out of the police, and officers were given option. You want to follow or you want to remain. Some followed, went to the current SSS, some remain in the police. And so the same problem will persist. But like I always say, if you are talking of a state police, which is desirable, but you have to look at it within the context of the politics surrounding it and the economy of its desirability. And like we discussed yesterday, a lot of states have quasi-police organizations. How effective are they? If you go to Kano, you have Hisba. If you go to Gombe, you have Marshal. If you go to Lagos, you have the Lagos Neighborhood Safety Corps. If you go to Cross River, I think they have what they call Green Police or thereabout. And how effective have they been in providing that safety and security? That because I believe that when we now begin to talk about state police, these are the organizations that will form the basis to a large extent of the police, and they are ineffective. I am involved in training one of these organizations. I don't want to call its name. One of these state-based quasi-police organizations, and I was shocked to discover that 5,000 of them were employed in a swoop. And they were trained for 1 week. And that training was only in marching. Left, right, left, right. Yeah, the students told me, I was shocked. They don't know anything on security, on safety and security. And you go across. I was also in a state where you have this quasi-security agency. In one of the states where I was commissioner of police. When I arrived in the state, I discovered 20 of these security people were in prison custody for murder cases. So you have quasi-security agencies in the states that have no values, there are no standards for anything. They abuse human rights even more than the police. They have hidden cells that nobody knows about. And then you have a large number of vigilante all over the place. In one of the states I was commissioner of police, I counted 110 vigilantes that refused to come under the fold of the state vigilance group that was formed. So you will still find the same problems, the challenges they are facing now
if we create that structure.
Yes.
But I'll come back to you with another question around, how do we insulate, if we want to proceed with state police, how do we insulate those units from, political interference, from the political elite in the states? But before I come to that, to Vladimir, let's assume that all of the issues we've raised here can be addressed, so we can train them, we can give them values, we can reorient, etc., etc. How can states fund these units when some of these states are unable to pay salaries, the old salaries, and we're now moving to a new structure where there's a revised salary scale that the states are struggling to pay? How can these units be funded? Do you have any creative ideas? Now we're trying to figure it out. How do we make this thing work? Yeah.
A creative idea. I mean, of course, if you give competences to the state, you have to give the states the money to fulfill these competences, to be able to exercise the competences, meaning that most of the money that nowadays goes to the Ministry of Police, Federal Ministry of Police, will go to the states. The issue, of course, remains if the federal government gives the money to the states, who decides at the end how much a state receives? What will be the basis of measure on that? Secondly, I mean, a creative idea, there is, of course, a creative idea. Scrap security votes, frankly speaking. There are not many states in the world where governors or states receive such a huge amount of money, and estimations say that 2018 it was about 670 million US dollar, million, 670 million US dollar that was given to the states in form of security votes. That's at least an estimation from Transparency International, from a Transparency International survey. Even if it's half of it, it's still a lot of money for Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, I mean, security votes were introduced by General Govern in the 1960s, and their purpose already there, but even today, was to react to security crisis. Now, I think that Nigerians know much better than me how very often security votes in the states are used and for what purposes, and that governors and states do not have to account for this money. This is something you won't find very often in the more developed world, let me put it that way.
Sure.
That you give money to someone and you do not ask public money, taxpayers' money, and you do not ask him or her to account for it.
So maybe an argument could be you can get your state police, but then the security vote goes to funding the state police.
Exactly, Patrick.
Because in that case, the governor really does not need any security vote.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one idea. One of the biggest fears that are expressed when people have these discussions around state policing is that if you allowed the governors to control the institution of the state police, in effect, the governors become imperial, and they can remain or perpetuate themselves and their families in power forever. We see some of that even with the national police, that if a state governor is aligned with the federal and gets the federal police assigned to their state for elections, they more than likely would win that election. So how do you insulate both the Nigerian police force and whatever institution emerges from this debate as a state police from political interference from the political elite in the states? Any ideas?
Okay, over the years, we hear governors, one of the reasons they give for requesting for state police is that commissioners of police are not obeying their orders. And I always say that, well, let them come and tell us what orders they gave that we didn't obey. Because the Constitution is very clear that when you give a commissioner of police a directive, he can inform the IG about that directive. Now, that clause, I believe, was made to protect the integrity of the commissioner of police, to insulate the commissioner of police from being used for political ambitions. Now, one thing I tell people is that if we are talking about state police, we look at other areas. There's nothing we are passing through that other countries didn't pass through too. And the closest country to us is our colonial masters, the former colonial masters, UK. How in UK the chief constable is insulated from political interference, except now that this present government brought in the police and crime commissioners, which is an elective post. But before then, there was what they call a tripartite system of managing the police. You have the Home Office, you have the police authority in each council, you have the chief officers. The chief officer is a collection of all the chief constables as a unit, like all the commissioners of police. Yeah, they are the people that rule the police towards what the government wants. Now in UK, government gives direction on what policing should be through what they call a national policing plan, which you don't have here. And they develop strategies and policies to support the police in doing that. Now, in terms of insulating the chief constable, a chief constable can be appointed by then the police authority, but the police authority cannot remove him or cannot give him directives that are contrary to the objectives of the policing plan. And so if a chief constable has problems or maybe misuse of power, the Home Office must come in and discuss. No one authority within the two can remove the.
Do we have similar structures in Nigeria that insulates the IG from political interference? And if we do, why hasn't it worked?
We don't have a similar structure. What we have is the police council.
Correct.
Now, the police council gives power of organization and administration of the police, and also to advise the IG, advise the governor, the president, on the appointment of an IG. But one of those clauses, which is organization admin, has never been used. Never. The police council only meets when they want to appoint an IG or they want to confirm an IG.
Now, who are the members of the police council?
The members of the police council, you have the president as the chairman, you have all the 36 governors, you have the chairman of the police service commission, and I think the minister of police affairs. Of the minister in charge of everything that has to do with, I think they are around 4. Internal affairs. So what you expect to have is that, which means the president cannot sack an IG without reverting to the council. But that is not what we have experienced in this country, and nobody has challenged it. Because the president just, an IG was dismissed through Twitter. Through Twitter, he was dismissed. The council was not invited. What one expects is that if the IG contravenes the provisions of his power or the law, he should be queried. And that his answer should be taken to the council to be discussed as to what disciplinary action should be taken. Sure. Because the president himself has power to appoint only an acting IG. He does not have power to appoint an IG. He appoints an acting IG and invites the council to confirm, which means the council has powers.
So which means that the state governors today have the powers to help insulate the IG and the police force from the influence of the president.
Absolutely.
Just that they have not used it.
They have not used it.
Okay. So we will come to the audience, but I want to go to Vladimir for one last question. So the argument we're seeing here is more of a pull for, decentralization. Yeah. Whereas around the world, we're beginning to see another force push for, a consolidation of police forces. Where does the theory lie on this? What's the world saying? What's the evidence showing? Where a country like Nigeria, within our political economy, where should we be going? Just some of your broad thoughts on this.
Okay. The concentration you see worldwide, and probably not everywhere, I think, of course, refers to special problems. The concentration we had after 9/11, the US, was a response to a terrorist attack that couldn't be, of course, solved by a single security agency. However, this incident was had a scale that was just too big to be solved alone. when we talk about security on the street, and that's probably most important, first of all, to make clear about what kind of security are we talking. What kind of policing are we talking? Are we talking about a protective police that guards the streets and prevents people from committing crimes? Meaning, for instance, including kidnapping, including robbery. Now, if we're talking about that, I am quite sure that a decentralized police can act much more effective on that than a centralized police. Now, how to decentralize police is the next question. I mean, you can even grant more autonomy within a federal police to its state elements without creating immediately a state police in the responsibility of a state government.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is another question that I haven't found any discussion on in Nigeria yet. How is it possible maybe to restructure the existing federal police to make it more decentralized and to act more efficiently in the regions, in the communities even? I think that's
okay, excellent. Let's open it up for questions, comments, contributions.
I have 2 questions, one apiece for these speakers. To the AIG, sir, I appreciate your conceptualization of community policing and how, to some extent, the Nigerian police has somewhat reflected this in its determination of posting, largely based on cultural affinity. But to what extent do you think this can be productive, this can be efficient, if control is lone? If control is solitary, if control is central, at the national level. Yeah, that's right. And to Greg, I enjoy your presentation. But you will agree with me that societies are largely, loosely classified into 2, the homogeneous and the heterogeneous. Even though they cannot be an absolutely homogeneous society and an absolutely heterogeneous society. Between these 2 societies, really, where do you think policing can be easier? And I need you to please help me relate this question, your answer, to the Nigerian situation. Thank you.
Thanks very so much. My name is Olumide Olaniyan. And my comment is to say that at the state where we are as a nation, I think decentralizing the police is inevitable. I'm saying this because if you look at it historically, from even 1900, when we have the West Africa Frontier Force, the police has always been, in quote, now working for the state. So what I think we need to do if we have a state police is for, of course, civil society and every one of us to work more to ensure that there's more accountability in terms of what the police is doing. But if we continue with the current situation where police is centralized, then we may not really have the kind of change that we desire in terms of having a more safe society. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Uli Thum from Friedrich Ebert Foundation. I'd like to make a comment. I mean, the recent debate about decentralization of police and community policing has been very mixed up, I think, and the 2 concepts have been interchanged to an extent that both concepts are actually not recognizable anymore. I think decentralized police as such has nothing necessarily to do with community policing. And it's community policing is about understanding the role of a police officer completely different in the relation to community. And I think it's also, it has to be, one has to be really realistic in how far do we have to change, is it possible to change the role and the understanding of a police officer who has been educated in the current system. So I think, and also connected to the whole debate of Amotekun, I don't see any really considerable community policing elements in the setup for Amotekun. I mean, it's a very competitive force in its makeup, and also if the payment, I mean, if you intend to pay 13,000 naira a month to to a police officer or someone who's almost considered as a police officer, I think it's very questionable.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Kwaja. I think for me, the point about state policing requires more deeper reflections, and I will raise 2 points. The first is that, do we really have a common understanding of the state of insecurity we are dealing with? Do we have an understanding that frames insecurity in a way that the Southwest, the North Central, the Northeast, the South can sit together and say, yes, this is what we can see as the crisis we are dealing with? And I'm raising this because when we look back 2009, 11, 12, the Nigerian government spent several years trying to mobilize Nigerians to have a common understanding of the security threat that Boko Haram posed in this country. Back again, when pockets of violence started, different states, each governor will speak and talk about state police. Some states will say, we are not ready. Many of the states that are shouting state police today were not shouting state police when others were shouting in the past.
Okay.
And so the second point I want to make is that, do we also have a common vision of a policing plan for this country? If we have a common vision, or we are contesting what we have now, my next question for us to reflect, not even response here, is what model of policing are we practicing? Because it's when you are able to appreciate the model and the context within which that model is situated and is operational, that you will say these are the defects, and that in envisioning a plan for policing, this is the kind of model that we want to put in place,
Sure.
so that 5 years from now we won't come back to be holding this kind of conversation that we are holding. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, in all of the discussion that have been happening around community policing, state policing, one thing seemed to be missing, and that is the accountability question, and which, of course, Patrick had raised. And I would like to get the thoughts of the AIG retired, that at the federal level, what you see, we have the Ministry of Police Affairs, we have the Police Service Commission. These structures don't seem to be working. Now, when we talk about state policing, but we seem to be missing the part about who are the people or the entities at the state level that are going to hold this personnel accountable. So I would like to get your thoughts around what possibilities are there that if eventually Nigeria goes the way of state policing, we can have platforms at the local level, people who are holding those who are policing them accountable.
Sure.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I just want to say the fact that the Nigerian police, as presently considered in most places, some commentaries, they see them as an occupation force. People don't have faith in them anymore. I am aware the state governors are providing logistics, vehicles. I hear that even the governor donated a barracks to them sometime. There's no state that has not been supporting the Nigerian police. So the question of funding, I think they can do that with their security vote and everything. They can do that because the problem, as presently constituted today, Nigerian police have not been able to solve it. People are being killed on a daily basis. The AIG talked about adaptability of a democratic process. And I want to state that the democratic appreciation is a continuous thing. It's not a 100-meter dash. So you don't expect that, from 1999 by now, we should get it all at this time. It's a process. The truth of the matter is that the way it is, in 1999, pre-1999, nobody talked about the issue of state police the way we are talking about. Is that because something has gone wrong? And there has to be a paradigmatic shift to correct that problem. And that is only the question around state police is resonating on daily basis. even with our motor as we have it today. So the tough protection, that is the problem we have. Sorry, sir. The tough protection. I had the opportunity of being in a meeting like this. Every senior police officer wouldn't want to hear about decentralizing of police. Tough protection is a problem. And we should come out from this toga and look at the reality on ground and see how we can resolve this problem. People are dying on a daily basis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My name is Chris Lapang. My question would be to the AIG, sir. We understand the gap in the security personnel within the country. And I also understand that it is the gap that led to the proliferation of vigilante groups and ethnic militias in various places. To what extent has the community policing structure been able to leverage on the available manpower that have clearly volunteered themselves to do that work of policing? Thank you.
In front of you.
Thank you. Mine is a comment. My name is Usaini Abdul, and I'll comment by actually making reference to history, and I love that because I feel that increasingly, as in a country, we have lost significantly patience and rigor for national conversations. And therefore, when we get into this kind of conversation, what you get is just mob reactions. And therefore, you are not able to talk. One, I don't know whether how many of us here can remember that at a point in the history of this country, we had 3 layers of police. We had the national police, we had the regional police, and we had the native authority police, particularly in northern Nigeria. And in this same country, until the Nigerian Civil War, the police was the single most important state institution in this country. Until the Civil War, it was the single most important institution and was the major, arguably the only symbol of the state that you have anywhere. What happened? How did we arrive at this stage? That is the questions that we are not asking. How are we linking this with the crisis of the state? That it is not the police that is in crisis, that the state, the institution of the Nigerian state is in crisis, and the police is just a symbol. For me, that's a missing link. Second, there is nothing fundamental, and I agree, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with having a regional or state police. I think structurally it is workable, and within our own federal system, we can work it out. The details, the nuances, and all that are clear. We can work. There are several things we can learn from. We can learn from the Judicial Service Commission and transform the Police Service Commission to actually play the kind of role that the Judicial Service Commission plays today in terms of appointment of judges, including high court judges for the state. These are ways. But for me, my worry about the state police issue is that it's not an issue of decentralization. Let's mark that. It is actually about re-centralization. The states are not demanding for police just for the purpose of decentralizing the police, but it is about re-centralizing it in a very different form. And what do I mean? I'm sorry, I'll just take a few seconds to wrap up this. What I mean by this is that the states are incapable or have totally failed to even allow the major organ of decentralization to function, local governments. If you can allow local governments to function as major decentralized institutions and bodies, how do you decentralize the police? So what that means is that the state government wants to have a police of their own, which will be centralized at the state level and left to the control of the state governors, just like the police at the national level is being controlled by the president or at that level. That's the conversation. This is the debate that we need to have So it is not decentralization, it is about re-centralization. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Uwe Brettschneider. I'm the security and counterterrorism expert at the EU delegation. It's been more than 4 years that I'm in Nigeria, and as you can imagine, dealing with security in the first place. I would like to, because there have been many questions asked, I would like to go one step above and ask you, does Nigeria need a security sector reform? And if you answer yes, my answer is yes, then I ask you how? Because that's much more complicated than what we are discussing now. A state police and police reform is only part of what's required in the country. My colleague Greg was mentioning that they were dealing since 2006 with the security sector reform and interagency collaboration. I don't want to criticize, but it seems you didn't get far. Because what we tried, the European Union delegation, addressing it to certain agencies and institutions in Nigeria, was supporting and raising the attention for security sector reform. If we don't achieve the mindset in the people who are in charge, if we don't gain the political will, we will neither get security sector reform nor state police. And that's what I'm worried about. And only the current discussions, even yesterday at the House of Representatives, triggered, obviously for the first time, a more or less comprehensive approach. Because the closer the security threat comes, the more people's attention is raised. And that's what we see now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Evening, I'm Colonel Henry, Major B. retired. What we need now, we have agreed that there's an urgent need for decentralization of the Nigerian police force because of so many.
Have we agreed?
Oh, okay. There is need for us to agree that there's need for decentralization of the police force in Nigeria. Because basically what is in vogue all over the world is preventive policing. And we know so many reasons and challenges of the security environment because security is everybody's business. And because of that, we need to come together. All of us, we are stakeholders in the security. And the last speaker said something which is that there's lack of political will in this country to just say the truth. Because what does it need to change the constitution? If we agree, what does it need to have a plan? So, but everything has to be holistic because there is need for an urgent, maybe just coming together for that security sector. It has to be reformed because involving everything, both the judiciary, the military, the civilians, the politicians, sure. Everything, we need serious security reform. And that one will engender decentralization of the police so that it will be effective. Both because you have police in so many segments. It could be at the federal level. In those days, we used to have about 3 layers of police. And so that some of them can be drafted to the one you are putting the military sure. to do now. And at the same time, the local policing or community policing and state policing is very necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Charles Achedo. From 2006 to about 2012, there has been series of committees set up to reform the police. And none of them has been implemented. I think it's something we need to hear from him why those were not. Because significantly, most of those reports and white papers were included extensively, some of the points being raised here, including community policing. Secondly, I think your definition of community policing is a little bit, I think you are being subtle in terms of how you defined it. You talked in terms of the values, but you didn't talk in terms of the structures on which those values are anchored. Because when you talk of community policing, significantly, it is being policed by the person that you know, and the person policing you knows you also. So it's taking it down to that level. And I think some information has been that came up here with regard to decentralization. And I think with a decentralized police system embedded on a very strong community policing arrangement, that is feasible in this country. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Saleh Momale. Thank you next year for putting this together, and thank you, Austin, for all the efforts, well in service or not out of service, and still on these issues. I agree with all contributors that it's a very critical and very important issue for our national discourse. I subscribe to the fact that coming up with a strategic framework for dealing with our various security challenges is the most important and most central, and it should be that policy and those ideas that should drive the kind of police system, the kind of security system, and the security architecture that we are going to develop, rather than the other way, to start by saying, do we have state police, do we have regional police, do we have national police, and that what do we really need as a country, what are our key challenges, and how do we strategically organize ourselves as a country to respond to these challenges, current and emerging challenges, and what type of security system will best address this. The community policing we speak about, for me, is just a stopgap, and it's a reflection of the inability of the Nigerian state to put the necessary resources, manpower, and personnel to manage our security system. And I think this is very central. We have the human resources to recruit, to train, to get the support, and to have a system that will guarantee safety of lives and property. But the way it is now, irrespective of whether it is state or federal police, if the current scenario continues, I think Austin adequately made references to some of the quasi-security architectures put up by the states. They all put them up to gain the political popularity for doing that. Other than that, they abandon those institutions, and then those institutions also become part and parcel of the security problems of those states and those societies and communities. And today we can see some of the havoc being ravaged by some of the vigilante groups that emerge under different contexts. Many of us are very happy when the vigilantes are formed for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Afterwards, we begin to complain of the same vigilantes what we constituted in our villages, in our neighborhoods. This is a key challenge that we need to reflect as a country. Thank you.
From my notes, if you can speak to issues around accountability and control, yeah? Because I think most of the questions were around those. And there's also a question on what extent community policing structure has taken advantage of the various vigilante groups that we have in the state. So how do we ensure accountability? And if we already have these vigilante groups, etc., you know, how do we strengthen them without getting stuck in the whole debate? Yeah.
So one of the fundamental framework of community policing is accountability. And by accountability, we mean that there are structures within the community that the police is accountable to. And some of the work we have been doing, we've been able to lead communities in developing what we call community safety partnerships. We have community safety partnerships in many of the communities we are working. One of the responsibilities of this partnership is to hold the police accountable. As a matter of fact, in the states we are working, there's what is called a divisional policing plan. That divisional policing plan is developed between the communities and the DPO, the police officers, so that it's a platform for holding the DPO accountable, the police accountable for what they do and how they do what they do. So, and that those are informal structures where in other climes you discover that government has made it mandatory. For example, in UK, it's mandatory. There's a law for partnership. There's a law for community engagement. But here is the police that is driving this bringing communities together. You remember the last IG also had what they call Eminent People's Forum. That is also one of the platforms that he designed to hold the police accountable and also to advise the police. And we also have this PP police public relations committees that work closely with the police and also hold the police. But these are all informal structures that are always working with the police. But you could formalize them if, for example, we have a law on that. And then you talked about the vigilante groups. Okay, what is happening now is that we are doing a revision of the community policing framework for the police. And one of the things we are doing is developing what we call the neighborhood policing structure. Now, the neighborhood policing structure is taking a look at, I hate to use the word vigilante because it's a negative word. It's taking a look at the activities of these groups and how they can be brought into a neighborhood policing structure. Just last week, the police sent out information that they are employing 40,000 constabularies. And these constabularies will work with the police in the communities. We used to have them we still have them. When I was CP Gombe, I had about 500 of them. And we use them, we work with them for several other areas that the police cannot cover. So they can be brought in to the mainstream community policing structure, but we need to understand that there needs to be guidelines for them that is agreed between the police and them and the state. The good thing is that, and Husseini is here, he's also one of those working on the Police Act, where there are structures that have been enshrined in the Police Act that there are community policing structures, and part of that responsibility is also an accountability structure. It goes right to the State Security Council that have a say in how the police will be structured. Some of us, what we want to see in future is a situation where the state begins to give direction, not control, direction, because the word control is what is frightening everybody, including the police. That is what is frightening everybody. Control. I prefer to use the word influencing the way you are being policed instead of controlling the way you are being policed. So some of us are looking into the future and say that, okay, in future, when you have the community policing boards as envisaged in the Police Act, then that board will have a responsibility of giving direction and also developing objectives of policing within the state, and also making sure that, yeah.
Okay, let me come to Vladimir. There was a question on, I'm not sure if he can have that one.
Okay.
On security sector reforms. Another question around that was from Obasanjo to Yaradua to Jonathan. We had 3 presidential commissions or committees, to review a reform of the police force. I came up with 2 of them came up with white papers, but nothing has happened. So these are good buzzwords to throw out there, but they've never quite worked in our context. How do we move forward? Because we need the security sector reforms to see how all of these different ideas fit together, but we have great difficulty in getting them done. And I know your foundation works with the security agencies and the military to drive some of these types of things. In pragmatic terms, what can we achieve without focusing too much on these grandiose ideas, which is what we should be pushing for, but we have shown an inability to do them?
Implementation has always to do with good leadership. Let me put that very clearly. You can put whatever you like on a paper. If it gets not implemented, it's not helping. And who is responsible for the implementation? The leadership. It's very simple. Now, I think Nigerian people should ask themselves whether they have had good leaders in the past and today. And probably you will get to the answer, how can this country be changed? Of course, it's not a simple answer. I have to completely agree. How can you change your leaders? You can only choose the leaders out of a pool of people who run for positions and offer themselves to be your leaders. This is, of course, connected to the question that has been raised before as the very first question. Is it easier to provide security for a homogeneous country or heterogeneous country? It's, of course, easier to provide security for a homogeneous country. Culturally, ethnically, religiously homogeneous. I mean, more or less homogeneous, I agree. But a heterogeneous country poses always challenges. Conflicts between the different ethnic groups, between the different religious groups. You can see it everywhere in Nigeria, even a conflict like the farmer-Surdus conflict, which was in the beginning actually a conflict about land, has been misused because of political ambitions and probably the question of power to become a conflict between religions. Now, the provision, I mean, you can even look all around the world, and you can compare those countries which are rather consist rather of a homogeneous society, and those who are multi-ethnic and multi-religious, and you will quickly realize that the homogeneous countries are more developed than most of the multi-ethnic countries in the world. Most of the multi-ethnic countries in the world face the same problems, especially separatism, terrorism, violent conflicts. You can look to the Philippines, you can look to Burma, Myanmar, so Southeast Asia, even our rather homogeneous countries, some of them which have to cope in Europe, have to cope with cultural diversity, like Spain, face serious issues with their minorities. Yeah, so it's rather easier to rule a society that is homogeneous than a society which is heterogeneous. Heterogeneous not only in terms of ethnicity and religion, but of course in interests, political interests. Now, how far did we get with the SSR? I have to thank my colleague from the EU delegation, and I would like to counter his question with another question. How far did we all get, actually? And including the EU delegation and any other international organization that has been here for probably decades or since the 1970s providing support to Nigeria. And if we compare the development, or if we take a longer period into account, we will realize that the situation in this country is worsening. Actually, every day, if you ask me. And you can even give more billions to this country and it won't change. I'm coming back to the political will that was criticized here left to me. There is probably a lack of political will to change something in this country. Let's start with a topic, for instance, that hasn't been discussed yet, but has a very great importance for policing: the demographic development in the country. This country, the population increases every year by at least 5 million people. Meaning that actually every year you have to increase the police force to provide for 5 million people security, for 5 million people more security. And we're talking about a population in 2050 of probably 400 million people. How is this country going to provide food, social security, security to persons and property of 400 million people in 2050 if the development continues? How is the labor market going to include all those people if you consider that you already have today 24% unemployment officially, and unofficially probably the number is much larger? And considering that probably 42% of this population already live below the minimum of existence, meaning that these people are extremely poor. according to statistics at least. Considering today that, I think that was the UN figure I found somewhere, that annually about 50,000 women die when they give birth to a child in Nigeria. This is the highest figure in the world. 13.5 million children are out of school in Nigeria. That's the highest figure in the world. We can continue with all these statistics, of course, and we will realize that this country is not developing well. And one thing, of course, about that is the leadership in the country.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not quite sure if that deserved a clap or a cry, but let's work with the one we have. If Austin can comment on why we haven't, implemented any of the presidential committee white papers, and also where we are on security sector reforms, and allow me again to load another question on it, which is, and I'm coming back to what Hussein Abdul contributed, that if we have seen state governments trying to re-centralize, why should we then be having this conversation at all on state police? Sir.
Oh, okay. We've had series, I think 3 committees about reforms. But for some of us, when you look at the content of that reform, especially when you look at the Dambadami police reform, and I was part of those that I was involved in analyzing the reform, and we discovered that it was more of a reform for more of purchasing, more of equipment. It was an equipment-based reform. Buying of vehicles, construction of police stations, buying of uniforms, changing. It was that reform that made us to change to blue and black. It was part of the reform. And so you will discover that 99% of that reform is about buying equipment. Nothing about the philosophy of policing. Nothing about the style of policing and how to go about it in that reform, and even several other reforms. And some other reforms, we're talking about human rights, not to abuse human rights. But what do you do? None of this reform talks about structures, systems, processes, competencies, defining these issues in such a way that you have a roadmap and you have a vision where you want to take this reform to. None of them. And so, I mean, the Damadami report, government costed it 7 trillion naira. Where will they get that kind of money? For 5 years. They say 5 years to buy equipment. Community policy was mentioned in that document. But it is in the last chapter. It was like an afterthought. Whereas it should have been the first thing to discuss, the philosophy of policing, the kind of policing, that the democratic policing and all that. So nothing like that was discussed. And even, fortunately, I was head of community policing then. What funding did we get? We were still relying on the British Council. No funding came to even continue when the security, justice, and program folded up. So we are yet, and there was no Police Reform Act. We don't have a Police Reform Act. So let me say, from what my brother Husseini, Dr. Husseini has said, in comparison with even the lack of capacity of state governments to allow even centralized institutions to function effectively in their states, it means that we do not need a state police, because the same fate will befall the state police, no matter the structures you put. And let me read something from one of the eminent scholars, 1 or 2 things. Solomon Kainde is a Lagos-based lawyer. He said the creation of state police forces will encourage state governors to muzzle any opposition within their states. Nigeria has walked this road before under the 1953 Constitution. Then the police were under regional governments, but they were grossly abused by politicians. Therefore, there is a clear indication that if we return to this system, this crop of politicians will also abuse it. One may be quick to argue that the role of the police under the present dispensation is being abused by the federal government, that it is used against the opposition. This argument can best be answered by looking at two agencies, that is, the Independent National Commission and the State Independent Electoral Commission. An amendment made to the Electoral Act created State Independent Electoral Commission, which conducts election into local governments, which had previously been handled by INEC. Since its creation, no state, I think at the time he wrote this, no state in Nigeria has boasted of two chairmen from opposition parties. SIC declares the ruling party in the state as the winners of all the contested seats in local government. This is in contrast to what operates at the national level. Though one may allege that INEC are presently constituted, it goes on to say, and the eminent scholar, Chief Afe Babalola, said, I do not think at this stage, and having regard to our experience about governors and local government chairmen, that we have reached a stage where we can have state police. We will regret it if we create one now. Are you not aware of people buying police uniform and attacking people during elections? If we have state police, we will never have any credible election in this country. We have not reached that level of maturity where we can have a state police. And there are several people from the 1960s, these are people from the 1960s that are saying this. Even to conclude, Chief Richard Akinjide, former Attorney General, I think he said, I say no to it when he was asked about state police. I remember Richard Akinjide, I think he was Attorney General in Western Nigeria. And it is because we have tried it before and there were lots of problems. That was why it was cancelled. If we reestablish it, it will mean going back to square one. The people calling for state police really don't know what they are calling for.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Eminent scholars there, jurists. I'd like to give someone in the audience the microphone to make a strong argument, a very strong argument for state police.
My argument will be very brief. First, before I start, I don't support the concept of state police because a lot of what he has said is actually correct. We'll end up with, yes, we'll end up with mini emperors who will use it to oppress the opposition. That is fact. However, we also have to bow to inevitability. The federal government cannot finance the police force any longer. Nigeria is not broke, Nigeria is bankrupt. That is inevitability. So our question, what we should be asking ourselves seriously is how do we conduct the change management as we have more regional-based people clamoring for security? That is the strongest argument for state police, the financial arguments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A state police could help in deepening our federal character. And I say this because of the complexity of the country. The country is very large, and it is practically unworthy and impossible for it to actually be policed centrally. And therefore, we need the state police, not necessarily in terms of what funds will come, or not in terms of responding to what we are dealing with today. Because what we are dealing with today, kidnapping and all that, are major issues that are rooted in our political economy, which the police cannot change. But we have to look at it within the long-term perspective of deepening our federal system. And so if we take the state police, we can structure it learning from our experiences of the past. The Akinji days, what they were saying, Babalola and all those fears. I studied extensively the Northern Nigerian Native Authority police system. And I can speak authoritatively about it and what was done and how it was
it was actually mismanaged. So we all understand that they are properly documented. But we can learn from those experiences and ensure that we institute a system and accountability mechanisms that we allow the state police to serve its purpose. Excellent. And the fear for me is the political will. The political will issue is a leadership concern. It is not something the police can change, but we believe that as people, as citizens, if we increase this kind of conversation and we mobilize ourselves, we can compel in one way or the other certain level of commitment that we allow for this change to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Hassana Abdul Aduku. You know, I strongly believe what he said. If we want to find solutions to problem, you have to go back to the source of this problem. And we have agreed that the problem of instability started when taxation was not really stopped, but the traditional rulers were not given that mandate, that power to collect taxes, and that's when this problem started. You know, because if they know that they are going to collect money from people who come to the community, you know, everyone knows who comes to the community at a particular time. And at that time, the traditional rulers have the power to demand for taxes from the citizen. And because of that, they were vigilant. And so they know any criminal that enters the village. You know, so I think in the reform, we should reposition our traditional institution to be stronger than individuals.
Thank you very much. Now,
you know, no, then then the awareness again. You know, they said police duty is everyone's affair. And I recall a situation in the US where a young girl, I think age like less than 10 years, you know, happened to see their neighbor. And then she finds out that every day this man does not go out. And immediately she reported the case. And when she reported the case, they came and picked the man. And he told them the reason why he doesn't go out. You know, he came, he had a work permit, but where he was to work, they gave him like 2 weeks. And that's why that girl saw him all the time at home. You know, so our system, our mindset about building what do they call high-rising building, then they get the fences and everything. You don't know what is. Yeah? Say something.
Thank you very much. Can I have some 2 quick arguments, strong arguments against state police? And after this, we are going to take a vote. A quick one, quick vote. Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Sadiq Mohammed. I'm totally against the state police because of political hijacking. They really hijack it, and there will be actually a lot of chaotic situation in the state. Several evidences as acquired in 1979, most in states like Kano, like Kaduna, and Katsina. So what you need to have is community policing, not state policing. I think that the two concepts have been mixed. So actually, I'm totally against the state policy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My name is Chris Adigu. I totally agree with the last speaker. What we actually need is community policing, not state policing. My dear friend there, the lady that just spoke, touched a little bit of what I also have in mind. You see, our solutions to most of our problems here also has to be very indigenous. You know, she did mention the traditional rulers. Do you know at times my mind crosses to even to road transport workers, the garages, the market women. You know, we need to take this down. Security has to go to the roots. You know, in community, why is it that we use vigilantes in our local communities? Because at times when you get there, they know those little pickpockets. They know the criminal that just walked in. The police cannot handle. Yes, even in the US. That's why you have those deputy sheriffs at those little grassroots. You need people who can interface with their local communities or their wards. You know, so ideally, we don't need state policing. We need policing that will come down to grassroots level.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If I get a lady, I'll give this against people one more vote. A lady to argue strongly against. Okay, so you don't change your gender.
I'm actually not satisfied with the present structure of our police system. That's one. And I am not in support of state policing. What I am proposing is a significantly decentralized system of policing at the federal level, from the federal level, with an embedded community-based policing or community policing system at the grassroots. And that what we then do is you have the federal responsible for policy formulation, for standardizing minimum operating guidelines and procedures. That can be done from the federal level. But at an operational level, you leave the decentralized systems to work. Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming to the close of the program, and I want to please join me in thanking the panel, Vladimir Craig and AIG Austin Ewa, for taking time to think about this question. And we put them out yesterday to talk about it, and put them out again today to share their views with you, and we really appreciate this. We're not sure if we've landed at the answer, but at least we've triggered a few more questions. What will happen from this point is that we'll write up everything that's been discussed, and we'll share it with you and also with people who are not in the room, in the hope that these debates, and discussions continue, and that at some point we arrive at something that works for us as Nigerians. And on that note, I thank you for coming out. And please, next time we invite you, please join us again as we continue these discussions. But it appears Ndo has a...
Sorry, I can't thank you guys enough. But we have another one coming up on the 18th. It's very important I talk about it. There's a research Nestle SPD conducted for Managing Conflict in Nigeria, MCN, supported by the British Council and the European Union. I think it's a report I think everybody in this room will want to hear. It's about titled Interesting Peace in the Northeast, where we looked at community resilience and peace building initiatives in 16 communities in Borno and Adamawa. It's quite interesting. You will see how local resilient effort is rising in these communities, and why we think the federal government and the state government should key into some of our findings, including donor partners here. I know Dr. Zene will call me this night. You need to key into some of our findings to find a way to, trigger a lot of things in this community. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.